Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our operational and procedural updates for the November 2021 election. I appreciate all of you being here. Before we get started, I just want to note a feature at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A feature. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them there. We're going to be monitoring the Q&A. Please don't use the chat for your questions. We're going to be looking at the Q&A and we will have an opportunity to answer those at the end of the presentation. If we don't get to your question today, please send us an email and we are more than happy to answer it that way. Again, you can find that at the bottom of your screen. It should be the right button there for you. The other thing to keep in mind at the end of the presentation is that you do need to take a quiz in your election officer portal in order to receive credit for the class. We'll get to the instructions for that at the end, but just something to keep in mind as we move through the presentation. Before we get started, I just want to introduce everyone that we have here with us in the room. My name is Alina Selnick Escobar. I'm the Election Officer Assistant Coordinator, and joining us today we have.
Hi, y'all. My name is Ravi Udashi, and I serve as the Election Officer Manager. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Hi, I'm Steve Barra. I'm a trainer with the Office of Elections.
Hi, my name is Linus Bambaka, and I'm going to be helping with the Q&A part of this session.
Good afternoon. This is Leslie Norco. I'm also here assisting and one of the trainers.
Hi, I'm Sandy Roback, and I'll be assisting with today's session.
Great, thank you very much. All right, let's get started with what we are going to be covering in today's session. We're going to be talking about some COVID-19 procedural updates, some exciting changes to ballots and forms, some poll pad updates, our voting equipment, the Express Vote ballot marking device and the DS200 scanners, and we'll finish up by talking about curbside and drop box procedures. So why are we all here today? 3 things: the security, accuracy, and transparency of the election. We've taken a look at all of our procedures and are updating them accordingly to increase and enhance the security, accuracy, and transparency of the election. Our hope is that throughout this training, you can see why we've made the updates to our procedures. And we want all of you to keep these in mind before Election Day and on Election Day. So as we go through this presentation, please keep in mind the security, accuracy, and transparency. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to send them in the Q&A or send us an email about it. All right, let's jump into our COVID-19 procedures for this election. Starting with our procedures for election officers, just a reminder that election officers must wear a face mask while working on Election Day. In terms of voters, we will encourage voters to wear face coverings, but legally we cannot require them to do so. If you do have a situation where a voter enters your polling place without a face covering, you should first offer them a face mask. If they do not wish to wear a face mask, they may vote curbside. They can do that outside with a clipboard. They don't have to go back to their car. And if they refuse either of those options, then they should be allowed to vote in the voting room. If you have any issues with this, you should direct this voter to your chief. If your chief has any questions, they can ask the office. All right, in terms of PPE supplies that you will all be receiving, each precinct will receive acrylic sneeze guards. These can be set up at your check-in tables, at the ballot table, or at the chief's table if needed. Boxes of face masks, which may be used by election officers or offered to voters. Hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes. Let's move on to our next section, some ballots and forms. We have some exciting updates here. For our ballots, the biggest change that you will notice is that our ballots are going to be padded and stubbed. So no more loose ballots. This means you will not have to count your ballots. That will greatly increase the accuracy. There's not going to be an opportunity to miscount any ballots. As you can see on the bottom picture, the perforated edge at the top, that's the stub. That's what's going to hold all the ballots together. It's very similar to a legal pad, just a little bit more robust. The stub is going to have the number of ballots. So you can quickly glance down and see how many ballots you have issued. With this, we do want you to tear off a ballot from the pad when issuing it to the voter. So you should not pre-tear these ballots and pre-fill privacy folders. You should tear one off when the voter is being issued a ballot. The other thing you'll notice about our ballots is that they now have a ballot type. That's the BT number in the top right corner. This one, for example, is BT1. Each precinct, for the most part, will have one BT number, which will designate the contest the voter should receive. So in the majority of our precincts, the same contest will be applicable for all voters there. You can double check this in the poll pad. The poll pad is now going to have a BT or ballot type designation for each voter, so you can see that you're giving them the correct ballot. In terms of changes for our forms, we're moving in the direction of creating forms with clearer instructions, both for voters and for officers, and consolidating our forms to be multilingual. So the example that we have here is the ID confirmation statement. In the past, we've issued 4 different versions of this form in 4 different languages. For this election, you'll see that there's now one form with all of the languages included. This is not only easier for the chief, it's less forms to juggle, but it also provides a better service to voters. A voter will be able to fill out the same form in any of the 4 languages without having to find a different form or requesting a different form. So this is the start of a process, and we hope to provide you with better forms and signs as we move forward. So this is a continuous process of improvement for us. All right, our next section is poll pads and voting equipment, and I'm going to turn it over to Ravi to talk about these exciting updates.
Thank you, Elena. So let's go into some of the equipment that you're going to use at the polling place. So let's first start off by talking about the poll pads. So the big exciting change this time with our poll pads is that we are no longer using the iSync drives to import or export voter data, and we're no longer going to ask you to call our office a couple times during Election Day to do a turnout survey. Why are we able to make these changes? Well, our poll pads will now sync with a secure election database over an encrypted connection, allowing our office to monitor activity throughout the day. This is already the way our poll pads work during early voting. So they will now work on Election Day the same way they work during the first 44 days of voting. Of course, all of our devices, especially our poll pads, have gone through the highest level of testing and certification, including at the federal level, through the Elections Assistance Commission and its federally certified testing labs, at the state level, through the Virginia Department of Elections certification and testing process, and at the county and our office level. With these changes, we have eliminated the concept of a separate admin or chief's poll pad, and we're no longer going to use the poll pad printers. What you do need to keep in mind this election is to keep your poll pads within 30 feet of a mobile hotspot or MiFi device that we will issue to each precinct. If you keep them within 30 feet, then you'll be able to communicate. They'll be able to communicate with each other and with our secure election database. If you do need to take a poll pad outside of that 30-foot range temporarily, that's okay. It will resume syncing as soon as it comes back inside. With these changes, the poll pads will be simpler and easier to use for you on Election Day while maintaining the security and accuracy of checking in all voters. And we're very excited to be able to make these updates this election. Next, let's move on to the Express Vote ballot marking device. We've been able to perform a software update on our Express Vote ballot marking devices that's enabled a few exciting updates. First of all, there is now an updated interface on the Express Vote when a voter uses it to mark a ballot. In the past, a voter would get one contest per screen. So they have to vote in one contest, click next, another contest, click next. Now, instead, the Express Vote will show all contests on one screen, much like the regular paper printed ballots. It'll be easier for voters to use and select candidates on an Express Vote. Another exciting change is that the Express Votes will no longer have a USB flash drive. This will make your closing procedures easier because you'll no longer have to remove that device or account for it. All the information that was on the USB flash drive is now simply loaded on the firmware of the device itself. And of course, because the Express Vote is just essentially a large pen used to mark a ballot, there is no voter or voting information stored on the device itself. And of course, we need to remind you that any voter may use the express vote ballot marking device. So it's important that you don't hide it in a corner. You should place it somewhere in your voting booth area, prominently placed, so that any voter can see it and choose to ask for it if they would like to vote on the express vote instead. We don't expect a big surge in voters, but we want to make sure that any voter understands that they have the option of voting on express vote if they so desire. Now, let's move on to the DS200 ballot scanners. As you may know, every precinct receives 2 DS200 scanners. Starting this election and going forward, we're going to ask you to set up and configure both of those DS200 scanners. They should both be ready and operational for use at any moment on election day. Why are we asking you to do this? Well, we want to make sure there's never a disruption of service to voters if for some reason one of them is not able to be used. Furthermore, you'll notice that each DS200 scanner has a ballot compartment. That's the compartment at the bottom of the picture you see there. Anytime that there are ballots inside that compartment, it should be sealed. What this means is that the DS200 scanner will not have a seal on that particular compartment when it arrives at your precinct, but as soon as you have it ready for voters to use, there should be a seal applied to it. If the DS200 scanner becomes full or jammed during election day and you need to open that compartment, you're going to remove that seal, give it to the chief so they can record it in their log, and then apply a new seal afterwards. Finally, at the end of the day, just like we did in June, we're going to ask you to remove 2 USB flash drives from each DS200 scanner, but only after the machine has been completely shut down. These USB flash drives, for a total of 4 from each precinct, will then be given, they'll be deposited, in a purple pouch, and then given to what we are calling our collector officers. These are 2 officers, generally of different party affiliations, who will take these materials, the USB flash drives from the DS200 scanners, and the absentee ballots from the drop box at each polling place, and immediately drive them to our office at the Fairfax County Government Center. Why do we need the USB flash drives from the machine so quickly? Well, we're able to take that information, load it into a database here, and immediately see the results of the voting from your precinct. If all goes well with our tests and with this process, this election, we expect that this will be the last time we need to ask you to call in your phone results, your voting results at the end of the night. So please do your part to help us get these back in a timely and secure manner. And if all goes well, we'll be able to eliminate the call-in process next election. So as I mentioned, these are exciting updates to our poll pads and voting equipment for this election. We hope to make the process for you before, during, and after election day a little bit simpler and easier, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. Now, let me turn it over to Steve to talk to you about the curbside and drop box procedures.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some modifications to the curbside process. The major modification that we're making to the process is that we will now be taking the poll pad outside to check in curbside voters. I'm assuming that many of you have had an opportunity to do curbside voting, but let's go ahead and go through the procedure that will be used in the upcoming election. 2 officers will go outside with a poll pad, a ballot, a privacy folder, a pen, and a clipboard. Once they're there, they will review the voter's ID and check in the voter on the poll pad. And don't forget to select the curbside flag. During this process, you will still be repeating the voter's name after you have verified their record on the poll pad. Then you will give the voter a ballot in a privacy folder and allow them to mark the ballot. Officers will then, after the ballot has been marked, will return inside to cast the ballot. 1 officer will go outside to inform the voter that the ballot has been cast. Taking the poll pad outside improves accuracy as you have less risk of checking in the wrong voter, increases transparency by bringing the check-in process to the voter and never separating them from their IDs, and is more efficient as it cuts down on the number of trips election officers have to take. In the old process, there were 3 trips. In this process, there's only 2. You do not have to take a separate poll pad for curbside voting. Just use an available poll pad from the check-in table. And when you return the poll pad to the check-in table, make sure that you plug it back in. Let's go ahead and talk about the drop box. In the upcoming election, one drop box will be provided to every polling place. Each of the drop boxes need to be monitored during the day by an election officer. The chief will decide exactly the positioning of the drop box. In some cases, the chief may have the drop box positioned outside the voting room entrance. If it is outside the voting room entrance, the drop box will be monitored by the greeter. Your chief may also decide that it is more practical to position the drop box inside the voting room of your precinct. If it's placed inside the voting room, another officer, such as the one stationed at the check-in table, should monitor the drop box. It should be noted that the high school page cannot monitor the drop box. At 7 p.m., the collector officers, those officers assigned to bring the ballots back to the elections office, will be instructed by the chief to empty and count the envelopes, and they will do this inside the voting room. In the past, they may have done it outside the voting room. The change for this, or the update for this election, is that the envelopes will be, and the drop box will be brought inside the voting room. Then immediately after they have completed all their tasks, they will return the ballots to this office. Okay. Let's go ahead and go through, in conclusion, let's go through a summary of the things that we've covered today. COVID-19 procedures, the basic things are that all election officers must wear a mask, and we are recommending that all voters wear a mask while they're in the precinct. Ballots and forms, the biggest modification is that they will be padded and stubbed, which should make operations run smoother. Remember to be careful when tearing off a ballot from the pad so you don't tear it. Poll pads, two big things about that. One is there'll be no icing drive, so it'll make opening and closing the poll pads a little easier. And there will be no turnout surveys during the day. Voting equipment, remember that the express votes do not have a flash drive anymore, and that the DS200s will each have 2 flash drives each that have to be returned to this office at the end of the day. Curbside voting. As before, 2 officers will go out when practical. You will now be able to take the poll pads outside with you. If there is inclement weather, your chief should instruct you to keep the poll pads inside, make an extra trip to retrieve the ID so that the poll pads don't get wet. And the last is the drop box. Drop boxes should always be monitored during the day by an election officer. The collector officers will remove the ballots inside the voting room. Pages cannot be assigned to monitor the drop box. Elena?
Thank you, Stephen and Ravi. Let's go over the instructions for the quiz. So at this point, you can open another browser on the device you're using, or use a different device and take the quiz. It's a short quiz, so you can go ahead and do it right now. It's only 5 questions. You can either go to voteforfairfax.com, or you can use the no password link that we sent you about 30 minutes before this training. That will allow you to forgo the username and password and will take you right to your portal. Once you're in the portal, you'll see that first image right there. That's the top of the screen. That's the different pages on your portal page. You want to go to the training page. You see it highlighted in red here. You should see the same thing on your device. Once you get to the training page, scroll down to the bottom until you see the name of this class, Operational and Procedural Updates, and you'll see in blue letters, Take Quiz. If you're signed up for another class, such as the Election Officer Basics, you want to make sure that you're taking the quiz that corresponds with the right class. And now that you're in there, you can go ahead and start that quiz as well. You do need to take a quiz to receive credit for that class. But for today, for this class, Operational and Procedural Updates, do make sure you take the quiz. If you're having any issues with that, please feel free to send us an email and we will be more than happy to help. As you're doing that and getting ready to take your quiz, go ahead and submit any questions that you have in the Q&A feature if you have not done so already. We'll take about 20 minutes here to answer any questions that you all have. And again, if we don't get to your question today, feel free to send us an email and we will be more than happy to help. All right, and as you all are submitting questions, I see we have our Q&A number going up. We'll go ahead and get started. And if you have any questions throughout the remainder of the presentation, feel free to keep using that Q&A function and we'll try to get to as many as we can.
Okay, I'll start off. One question that a lot of people seem to have is just wanting clarification on how the curbside voting works with the poll pads when you take them out of the 30-foot range of the hotspot.
Sure, thank you, Linus. That is a great question. So as I think either Ravi or Stephen mentioned, that is okay if the poll pad leaves the 30-foot range, whether that means that the chief is taking a poll pad from the check-in table to their table to deal with a provisional voter, or if officers are outside, that's okay. The poll pad, when it returns to near the MiFi device, near that hotspot, it will start syncing again. So that is not a problem.
One question related to COVID-19. Do the election officers keep the PPE supply or do we return it to the election office?
If you have unused PPE supplies at the end of election day, those supplies should be returned to our office. Of course, we don't know how many supplies you're going to end up using in your precinct, so we try to send more than what you may need.
Couple of questions and I'll combine them all. What if the ballot gets torn when we're moving from the pad? Do we void or spoil it?
Great question. So with the change of this election that we're now using the padded ballots, as Lena mentioned, that does invite the possibility of when you go to remove a ballot from the pad that it may possibly tear. If that happens, you would simply spoil that ballot and issue a replacement ballot to the voter. So remember, the easy way to remember the difference between spoiled and void ballots is that a spoiled ballot is one that you need to replace for the voter, and a void ballot is one that the voter has abandoned at the precinct, which we don't expect you to have many, if any, on election day.
Okay, I have a DS200 question. Is there now a new process to link all the equipment to the mobile hotspot?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So the update this election is that we are sending a mobile hotspot or MiFi device to every precinct. We used to send them to about a quarter of our precincts that may not have had a different way of connecting their poll pads, but now every precinct will receive one. Only the poll pads will use the connection from the mobile hotspot to sync with our secure and encrypted election database. The other items of voting equipment in each precinct, the Express Vote ballot marking device and the DS200 ballot scanners, are never connected to the internet. They have no functionality or ability to connect to the internet in any way, such as having a modem or Ethernet port. So there's no reason to have any concern there.
I have a couple of people said that the express vote has never really been used in my precinct. What's the expectation for use of this election and how many people do you expect to use it?
That's a great question. In terms of expected number of voters, as Ravi said, we don't expect a huge surge in numbers, but the important thing is that we want the express vote to be ready and available for all voters. What that means for election officers is that we want all election officers to feel comfortable using the express vote and explaining its features. So I don't expect a large number of voters to use it, but it should be an option that you feel comfortable helping voters with, and it should be in a location in your precinct where anybody may choose to use it. So a good tip if your polling place is configured for this would be to set it up as one of the first tables near the check-in table. We don't want it all the way back in the corner where a voter may not see it or where it may be hard to get to. So that's really what we're trying to emphasize there, but it should be the same machine. We just want people to be more comfortable using it and officers to be more prepared to give instructions.
Well, as a general question, a couple of people have asked, will this be repeated or are we going to get this information in other formats as a manual, et cetera?
We will have more resources on our training page. Your chief always receives a chief's notebook, and they have step-by-step procedures for everything that you could do A through Z on election day. So they are a great resource to rely on election day. And if you would like refreshers before election day, you can always check our training page, or you can send us an email if you have specific questions.
Okay, one on DS200. Will we still run the tapes from the DS200?
Great question. Yes, the tapes will still print from the DS200. A good way to ensure that you're not taking out the USB flash drives too soon is that the tapes are going to run. I always think, let me make sure to unplug it first once the machine is completely shut down, and then remove the pieces of media. The actual closing down procedures will be very similar, and you'll have a one-page guide with step-by-step instructions on election day. So no need to remember every step.
I have a question regarding the Dropbox. Somebody's just asking, how do you verify the identity of voters who use the Dropbox?
Let me take that one. So if you are an election officer who is asked to monitor the Dropbox as one of your duties throughout the day, maybe for a 2-hour shift, you don't need to ask, and you should not ask, any questions of voters who may deposit a ballot in the Dropbox. Our guidance on this comes directly from the State Department of Elections, who have provided instructions to all election officers across the state that for election officers who monitor Dropbox, they should not ask a voter to provide ID or confirm who they are before they deposit a ballot in Dropbox, and that voters are allowed to deposit more than one ballot in a Dropbox. For example, if they're bringing ballots for themselves and another family member. And if you have any questions on election day about those procedures, feel free to give us a call in our office.
General question too, will we have an opportunity for hands-on experience with these machines before election day?
Yeah, let me answer that. That's good. Not this week, not next week, but the week after, there will be an opportunity to have hands-on experience with them, with trainers to assist. There'll be instructions and an email coming out to you in a week or so that will let you know the times and allow you to sign up for one of those opportunities.
Another question about curbside voting. With curbside voting, will the two election officers who head out, will they need to be from different parties?
So anytime you have a curbside voter, the chief should take a look and evaluate the situation in the polling place and send out 2 election officers of differing party affiliations, if practicable, to assist that curbside voter. We understand that sometimes things are very busy in a precinct and it may not be possible to send out 2 individuals. In those situations, you could send out 1 person. But we strongly encourage to always have 2 election officers when possible to be sent out to help a curbside voter. If you have an election page, that's a high school student serving as a volunteer on election day, they can also accompany that process, but they cannot replace the election officer in assisting a curbside voter. Good question.
Another general question. I voted early at the Reston North County Government Center. We use the poll pad voting instead of paper and pen. Will other precincts have online voting?
So I think this question is referring to the experience someone had when they went to vote early at one of our satellite locations. At our early voting locations, of which we have 16, 3 that are currently open right now, another 13 that'll open 10 days before election day. Most voters are able to vote on the express vote ballot marking device. As Alina noted, we are now printing our paper ballots a little bit differently. They each have a ballot type. So we have 249 different ballot types in use this election. And to make things a little bit easier, at our early voting locations, most voters will instead use the express vote, and they will select the ballot type that they need on there. At your precinct on election day, of course, almost all precincts will only use 1 ballot type, and so it'll be a lot easier for each voter to just use the printed paper ballots. But as I mentioned earlier, any voter has the option of using the express vote at either at an early voting location or an election day voting location, if they so choose.
I have one related to the COVID-19. Can you please explain the rationale behind the decision not to require officers to be vaccinated?
Sure, I can take that one. So our office is not playing a role in the vaccination or testing process involved for election officers. So what we are requiring this election is that all election officers must wear a face mask on election day. That is a significant requirement for us, and we want to make sure that all election officers are adhering to that. In terms of voters, as Alina noted earlier, voters cannot be legally required to wear a face mask or face covering. But as she said, our first option is to ask them to wear a face mask, go get one from their vehicle, or you can offer them one from the supplies that we provide you. The second option is that you can ask an unmasked voter to vote outside the polls. And if they decline both options, then they would be permitted to vote inside the voting room.
Will there be I voted stickers on election day?
That is a great question. Yes, there will be. Kay's supply team is working very hard to get all of those packed for you. So you will have I voted stickers this election.
By the way, just to add on to that, for those of you that may have applied for a vote by mail ballot, you will also receive an I voted sticker with your mailed ballot this election. Do we have additional questions?
There's one question, a general question. What percentage of voters vote early?
So in an election like this one, we are estimating that turnout maybe for the overall election, maybe as high as about 60%. And of that, we think maybe about 10% will vote early, and about 50% may vote at the polling places on election day. Of course, these are only our predictions. You never know. And we understand there are many organizations out there encouraging people to vote earlier on election day. So that could definitely make an impact. If you are an election officer and you are assigned to serve in a precinct that is not your own regular voting location, just make sure you vote early because you won't be able to vote on election day because you can't leave your assigned precinct.
I have a question about curbside voting. Someone just wants to confirm, like, if the precinct is busy, is it okay for just one election officer to take the poll pad and bring back in the ballot?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. As Ravi mentioned, the chief is going to make that decision and they will have more instructions about how to make that call. When practical, we do want you to send out 2 officers of differing party affiliations, but we understand that election day can be very busy. So your chief may make the decision to send out 1 officer if it's not possible to send out 2.
When will we receive our assignments, precinct assignments?
Good question. So we send out election officer assignments in multiple waves. We've sent out the first wave of officer assignments this past weekend, and we're going to continue sending out assignments over the next couple of weeks. If you have not received an assignment yet, don't worry. There are different requirements that we have regarding party balance in each precinct, regarding the distance that election officers are able to serve, and just the positions that we need to assign. So we do them in multiple waves. So we've sent out some number of assignments so far, but we are continuing to send out assignments over the next few weeks. The most important part, of course, is that you need to make sure you've completed all your required training. So by attending this class today, you are doing your operational procedural updates class. As Lena noted earlier, just make sure you go in and take that quiz. That's how we know that you've completed this class. And if you're a first-time election officer, or you are a returning officer who has not served earlier this year, you also need to make sure you complete the election officer basics class. That is a separate class with a separate quiz that goes over all the information you need to know to be an election officer in any election. And if you've completed both of those classes, then you'll be eligible for a precinct assignment.
Okay, one related to the DS200. How does the drop box function differ from the DS200?
So I think there might be some confusion for this question. I want to make sure we're very clear about this. As always, as we've done for many years, each precinct receives 2 DS200 ballot scanners. These are pieces of voting equipment, machines that are inside the voting room, and it's what every voter who comes to vote in person, when they fill out their ballot, they deposit it in this piece of voting equipment, which is completely separate from the drop boxes. Drop boxes were introduced in Virginia about a year ago after new legislation. They are a receptacle that is placed just inside the voting room or possibly outside the voting room or outside the polling place building, where a voter who received an absentee ballot in the mail, if they want, they can come and drop off that absentee ballot in a envelope in that drop box. So it's a large container. It's very different from a piece of voting equipment.
Are EOs allowed to work for a political party before, but not on election day?
So one of the things that we love about many of you that serve as election officers is you have interests outside of election day. And of course, you're allowed to do those things too. If you choose to participate with a local party committee or other political organization, you're welcome to do that. The important thing to remember is that on election day, you are a nonpartisan officer of election, and you should not be discussing political topics, wearing political clothing, or anything that would imply a political leaning one way or the other. So on election day, must be nonpartisan, but on your own time, you may choose to do what you'd like.
I have a quick question. Do absentee ballots have to be deposited only in their assigned precinct?
That's a very good question. The absentee ballots can be submitted in any drop box at any precinct in the county. Doesn't make any difference in your precinct or another precinct.
I think we have time for last couple of questions here, if anybody has them, and then we will wrap up for the day. Any final questions?
I have one last one with the DS200. Why launch 2 DS200s if only one is going to be used?
That is a great question. So some of you who have worked in a precinct before may know that in some of our smaller precincts, it's perhaps more practical to have all voters vote on one. However, we do not want to experience any interruption of voting for our voters. So in that case, if for some reason you had to transition to a second DS200, we don't want you to have to stop in the middle of the day and complete opening procedures. That's why at the beginning of the day, you'll prepare yourself by opening both machines. You can choose to turn one of them around so that voters vote on one. At the end of the day, of course, you would verify and close down both machines according to your guides and complete every step. But you would have that second machine kind of on standby. Your chief may decide to have both machines open depending on the volume of voters, but you do need to open both machines, and that's so that we ensure that there's no interruption of voting for voters should you need to move to a second machine.
How does the system know that we have attended this training?
Great question. You must take your quiz in the election officer portal. Again, you can go to the email that we sent you shortly before this training, click on your no password link, go to the training tab, scroll down and click on the take quiz button. If you have any issues with that, send us an email, but the way you receive credit is by taking a short quiz in the election officer portal. Do we have one final question before we wrap up?
Yeah, one. So there was a question about if for curbside voters, should you be bringing out an assistance form when you go out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is something that we recommend that you do, to bring out an assistant form, because often someone in the car may want somebody else to assist with that. So that is recommended, to go ahead and bring an assistant form. That's a good observation, whoever asked that.
Alina, I see a question that some people are submitting. Is this the only class and quiz that they need to take for this election?
Thank you, Ravi. That's a great question. So this is required for all officers, regardless of your position level. That's one. If you are a new officer, or if you have not served since the new appointment term, if you haven't served this year, you'll have to take election officer basics. you'll take that quiz in your portal as well. So that's what you need to do if you are a regular officer. If you're a chief or assistant chief, we've sent you separate communications, and you should be aware of either the chief and assistant chief basics and the chief's briefing. But if you are serving as a regular officer, a collector officer, a language officer, you must take this class, Operational and Procedural Updates, take that quiz. And second, you should check to see if you need to take election officer basics. You can even check that in your portal on the homepage. It'll tell you if your 2-year training, the election officer basics, is up to date. If you haven't served this year, you will need to take that quiz for credit. So that's the 2 things that the majority of our officers who are new or who have not served this year will need to take. Great question. All right, if we don't have any final questions, I will thank you all for spending the afternoon with us and listening to these operational and procedural updates. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send us an email. Please do not forget to take the quiz in your portal. If you're having any trouble, send us an email about that as well. And with that, thank you all so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to take this training, and we appreciate everything you do for the voters of Fairfax County. Thank you and have a great afternoon.